The phone rang, shattering the peaceful silence of my beachfront home. I glanced at the caller ID and nearly dropped my teacup. Madison. My daughter, who hadn't called me in 5 years, was suddenly reaching out on a random Tuesday morning. My hand trembled as I answered. Hello. Mom, it's been too long. How are you doing? Madison's voice was dripping with a sweetness I hadn't heard since she needed money for her first apartment after college. I stood frozen by this window, staring out at the Pacific waves crashing against the Newport Beach shoreline. The same waves I'd watched alone for the past 5 years through birthdays, holidays, and the anniversary of her father's death. I'm fine, Madison. This is unexpected. I kept my voice steady. Years of working night shifts as a nurse had taught me to remain calm even when my insides were churning. Well, Garrett and I were talking about you the other day, and we realized it's been way too long since we've seen you. We both miss you terribly. Garrett, my son, the same son who had borrowed $20,000 for a Mercedes when his finance job in New York wasn't paying enough to maintain his lifestyle, then conveniently forgot to repay it. The same son who couldn't be bothered to call when I fell and broke my hip 2 years ago. Is that right? I sat down slowly on my worn but comfortable armchair, the one Philip and I had bought together when we first moved into this little beach house 40 years ago. Back when Newport Beach property wasn't worth millions. Back when we were just a young engineer and a nurse starting our lives together. Actually, Mom, I was thinking of coming to visit you next weekend. Would that be okay? I've been so busy with my real estate business, but I've cleared my schedule just for you. My heart should have leapt at this prospect. Instead, suspicion crept in like the evening fog. I opened my laptop as we spoke and went to Facebook, something I rarely checked these days. There was Garrett's profile public as always, because he never bothered with privacy settings. My blood ran cold as I read his post from 3 days ago. Just found out Mom's been sitting on beachfront property in Newport worth at least $3-5 million, and she has no clue. Time for a family reunion. Below it, a comment from his wife Vanessa. Better start calling Mommy dearest again. And Madison had replied, already on it. Dibs on the master bedroom when she kicks it. 5 years of silence. 5 years of spending Christmas alone. 5 years of them not caring if I was alive or dead. And now this, Mom. Are you still there? Madison's saccharine voice pulled me back. Yes, dear, next weekend would be lovely. My voice didn't betray the storm brewing inside me. I look forward to seeing you. After hanging up, I stared at the phone for a long time, then I called my neighbor Dorothy, the only person who had checked on me regularly after Philip died of a heart attack 8 years ago. Dorothy, you won't believe who just called. I met Philip Thornberry during my second year of nursing school. He was a charming Irish-American engineer with bright blue eyes and dreams of building bridges. I fell for him hard, and within a year we were married. We scraped together every penny for a down payment on this little beach house that no one wanted back then. It needed work, it was tiny, but it had the ocean right outside our door. We raised our children here, Madison with her father's red hair, and my stubbornness, and Garrett with his father's charm and height. I worked night shifts, so I could be there when they came home from school. Philip worked overtime on countless projects. We saved for their education, scrimped on our own needs, and made sure they had everything they needed to succeed. Madison went to UCLA, then got her real estate license. Garrett attended NYU on the college fund we'd built by forgoing vacations and new cars. Both graduated without student loans, a gift from parents who knew the value of financial freedom. Now I stood in the kitchen preparing tea for Dorothy. At 70, she was still sharp as a tack, with silver hair always styled perfectly, and a wardrobe that put mine to shame. Elaine, you know why they're calling now, don't you? Dorothy settled into the chair across from mine, her eyes serious behind fashionable glasses. I saw Garrett's Facebook post. I poured the tea with a steady hand. Years of administering medications had given me that at least, after 5 years, they suddenly remember they have a mother. It's worse. Dorothy pulled out her phone. Madison's been asking around the neighborhood about whether you've ever mentioned selling. She called Tom Baker yesterday. You know, the real estate agent who sold the Jenkins place. She wanted to know if you'd ever had the property appraised. I felt my chest tighten. She didn't even ask how I was doing first, did she? Dorothy's silence was answer enough. You know, when I broke my hip, Madison told me she was too busy with an open house to come help. I stared into my tea. I had to hire a home health aide with my own savings. She knew that nurse's salary doesn't go far these days, but she didn't offer a penny. And Garrett? Dorothy asked gently. Last time I heard from him was 3 Christmases ago. He sent a card. No gift, no call, just a card. With their family photo at some ski resort in Aspen. Signed only by his secretary, I'm sure of it. I felt a tear slide down my cheek and brushed it away angrily. Vanessa, his wife, blocked me on social media after I asked to see pictures of my grandchildren. Dorothy reached across the table and gripped my hand. Elaine, you've got to protect yourself. These vultures are circling. I nodded slowly. I know, but what should I do? You remember Richard Sanchez? He retired from his law practice last year. Specializes in elder law and estates. His daughter goes to my church. Dorothy was already pulling out her phone. I'm calling him right now. As Dorothy dialed, I gazed out at the ocean. Philip and I had walked that beach every evening after dinner. We'd planned to spend our retirement watching those waves together. Now it was just me and, apparently, a pair of children who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle between them and property. Richard. It's Dorothy Williams. I have a friend who needs your help urgently. How soon can you meet with her? Richard. Sanchez was a distinguished-looking man with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes behind rectangular glasses. He arrived the next morning carrying a leather portfolio and a serious expression. Mrs. Thornberry. Dorothy explained the situation. I'm very sorry your children are putting you through this. He set his portfolio on my dining table, the same table where Madison and Garrett had once done their homework while I prepared dinner after a 12-hour shift. Please call me Elaine. I offered him coffee, which he accepted gratefully. I don't know what to do. They're my children. I raised them better than this. Richard nodded sympathetically. Unfortunately, I see this kind of situation regularly. Adult children who've been absent for years suddenly appear when they realize there might be an inheritance. I never thought it would happen to me. I admitted. I changed their diapers. I attended every soccer game and dance recital. I worked double shifts to pay for braces and summer camps. Elaine. Richard's voice was gentle but firm. I want you to understand something very important. This house is yours. You and your late husband bought it. You maintained it. You have every right to decide what happens to it. I nodded, though the lump in my throat made it difficult to speak. Now let's talk about options. Richard opened his portfolio. First, we need to know exactly what we're dealing with. I recommend getting a professional appraisal of the property. Is it really worth what they're saying? $3 million? I asked, still stunned by the figure in Garrett's post. Possibly more given the current market and your location. Richard looked out at my unobstructed ocean view. Beachfront property in Newport is extraordinarily valuable now. Over the next 2 hours, Richard outlined a plan to protect me and my assets. By the time he left, I had scheduled an appraisal, begun the process of creating a living trust, and started documenting all communication with my children. That night, I sat on my back deck watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. I remembered Philip sitting in the chair beside me, his hand warm in mine, talking about how we'd grow old here together. The pain of his absence was still sharp, but now it mingled with a new emotion, determination. My children had forgotten who I was. They'd forgotten the mother who had nursed them through chickenpox and heartbreaks, who had worked extra shifts to buy Madison her prom dress and Garrett his first car. They saw only an old woman sitting on valuable property. It was time to remind them who Elaine Thornberry really was. The appraisal came in at $42 million. I stared at the figure on the paper, remembering how Philip and I had celebrated scraping together the $80,000 down payment all those decades ago. How we'd worried about making the mortgage each month until our careers advanced. How we'd laughed at the idea that our little fixer-upper would ever be worth much. During the week, both Madison and Garrett called daily. Madison asked pointed questions about my retirement plans and whether I found the house too much to manage now. Garrett suddenly became concerned about coastal erosion and whether I had properly insured the property. I played along, acting oblivious to their intentions. It's so wonderful to hear from you both again. I told them my nurse's training helping me maintain the facade of the naive, grateful mother. Richard helped me set up recording apps for all my calls. California being a two-party consent state, I always mentioned casually at the start of each conversation that I was recording our calls. To remember all the details since I'm getting forgetful. They were too eager to get to their questions about the house to object. Meanwhile, Dorothy helped me monitor their social media. Madison had posted about helping mom downsize, and Garrett was already inquiring about coastal property tax implications in inheritance situations. The Saturday before their planned visit, Vanessa posted a photo of herself shopping for a new swimsuit with the caption, "Getting ready for beach life, soon to have access to some prime Newport real estate, blessed, family property." By the time Madison arrived the following Friday afternoon, pulling up in a rented BMW convertible, my plan was fully in place. Mom. She embraced me in the driveway, her perfume expensive and overwhelming. You look well, you look the same. The slight note of disappointment in her voice might have hurt once. Now it just confirmed what I already knew. Madison, darling, it's been so long. I hugged her back, noting how she was already looking past me to assess the house. The place looks quaint. Very retro. Her eyes calculated square footage and ocean frontage as I led her inside. We've never been ones for keeping up with trends, I said mildly. Your father always said, if it isn't broken, don't replace it. Well, maybe it's time for some updates. Madison set her designer luggage in the guest room, the same room that had been hers growing up, though she didn't comment on the photos of her childhood. I still kept displayed. Garrett's flight gets in at 7. He's taking an Uber from the airport. That's fine, dear. I'm making your favorite for dinner, chicken parmesan. Madison looked startled. You remembered. For a moment, I saw a flicker of my actual daughter, the girl who had once sat at my kitchen counter doing homework while I cooked, chattering about school and friends. Then her phone buzzed, and as she checked it, her expression hardened again. Garrett says he's bringing some interesting retirement community brochures for you to look at. Apparently, there's a lovely place in Arizona that has a golf course and everything. I smiled placidly. How thoughtful of him. As I prepared dinner, my mind wandered back to Madison's 16th birthday. Philip and I had saved for months to buy her the silver necklace she'd been eyeing at the mall. When she opened it, she had thrown her arms around both of us. Tears in her eyes. You guys are the best parents ever, she'd said. Where had that girl gone, and how had she transformed into this calculating stranger in my kitchen? I choked back tears as I stirred the sauce. Behind me, I heard Madison on the phone, her voice low. No, she doesn't suspect a thing. She's acting like everything's normal. Perfect timing on your research, by the way. That retirement community looks ideal far enough away that visiting would be a major hassle. My hands trembled slightly as I added oregano to the sauce. I thought of Philip, of how devastated he would be to see what our children had become. He'd always been so proud of them. They're good kids, Elaine, he'd say. Whenever they disappointed me in small ways, they'll turn out just fine. I wondered what he would say now. When Garrett arrived with Vanessa and their 2 children, my grandchildren whom I barely recognized. The performance continued. Vanessa filmed everything with her phone, presumably for her social media followers. The children glued to their tablets barely acknowledged my existence. Mom, you're looking good. Garrett embraced me briefly, his expensive cologne, not quite masking the smell of the scotch he'd clearly had on the plane. Thank you, Garrett. You're looking prosperous. I smiled at my grandchildren. Emma, Alex, do you remember your grandmother? They glanced up blankly, then returned to their screens without answering. Kids say hello to Grandma. Vanessa prompted, camera still recording. This is where Mommy and Daddy might have beach parties soon. Madison shot her a warning look, which Vanessa pretended not to notice. Did you bring those brochures you mentioned? Madison asked Garrett as they settled into the living room. Right here. He pulled out glossy pamphlets for Golden Sunset Retirement Community in Scottsdale. Mom, you'd love this place. They have activities, medical staff on site, and you'd be surrounded by people your own age. And how much does a place like this cost? I asked innocently. Don't worry about that. Madison jumped in. We can handle the details. The important thing is getting you somewhere safe and appropriate for your situation. My situation. I raised an eyebrow. You know, living alone at your age, it's not safe. Garrett gestured around. This house is a lot to maintain. Steps everywhere, slippery tile in the bathroom. One fall and who knows what could happen. I thought about pointing out that they hadn't cared about my safety when I'd actually fallen and broken my hip 2 years ago, but I bit my tongue. The time for confrontation wasn't quite right. During dinner, the conversation circled around the house like sharks around prey. How long had I lived here? Had I thought about what would happen to it, eventually? Wasn't it a lot of maintenance for someone my age? Wouldn't I be happier somewhere with people to take care of me? I answered vaguely, watching them exchange glances when they thought I wasn't looking. After dessert, I made my move. It's so wonderful to have you all here, I said, clasping my hands together. In fact, I've been thinking a lot lately about the future, about this house. I paused, noting how they all suddenly sat up straighter. I've made a decision I'd like to share with all of you. The anticipation on their faces was almost comical. Let's discuss it in the living room, shall we? They followed eagerly, settling onto the couch that had held our family for decades of movie nights and Christmas mornings. Vanessa was still filming discreetly, or so she thought. I've realized recently that life is short. I began settling into Philip's old armchair. Your father has been gone 8 years now. You children have your own lives. Madison leaned forward. That's what we've been saying, Mom. You should be enjoying your golden years, not worrying about maintaining this big old house. Exactly. Garrett chimed in. And property taxes in this area must be ridiculous. It's just not practical anymore. I nodded thoughtfully. You might be right, which is why I reached beside the chair and pulled out a thick folder. I've been consulting with a financial advisor and an attorney. Their eyes lit up. This was exactly what they had hoped for. Mom, that's so responsible of you. Madison's voice was syrupy. What have you decided? I opened the folder slowly. Before I tell you, I want to show you something. From the folder, I withdrew several printed screenshots, their Facebook posts and comments about my property, about Mommy Dearest, about when she kicks it. The color drained from their faces. Mom, those are just jokes, Garrett began, but his voice lacked conviction. Are they? Let's see. I pulled out my phone and played the recording from my call with Madison the previous week. I know, right? Madison's recorded voice said to someone else while she thought I was on hold. The old lady has no clue what that place is worth. We need to get her into assisted living ASAP before she figures it out or changes her will. Madison's face turned scarlet. That's taken completely out of context. Is it? Here's Garrett then. I played another recording, this one from 2 days ago. Vanessa, stop worrying. Mom has always been a pushover. We get her to sign over the house or put us in the will. Sell it for $4 million and we're set. She can live in some retirement village until she croaks, and honestly, who cares after that? The silence in the room was deafening. You see, I continued calmly, I may be old, but I'm not stupid. I changed diapers, kissed, scraped knees, worked night shifts, and put both of you through college without debt. I did not, however, raise my children to circle like vultures waiting for me to die so they could cash in. Mom, please. Madison started tears forming. I held up my hand. No, let me finish. 5 years. For 5 years, neither of you called me unless you needed money. You didn't visit on Christmas. You didn't call when I broke my hip. You didn't invite me to my own grandchildren's birthday parties. I looked at my grandchildren who had finally looked up from their devices, confusion on their young faces. But suddenly, when you realize this little beach house is worth millions, you remembered you had a mother. I shook my head. That's not love. That's greed. Vanessa had lowered her phone, her live stream forgotten. So yes, I've made a decision about this house. I pulled out a document from the folder. This is my new will, properly witnessed and filed with the county. Upon my death, this property will be donated to the Coastal Elders Foundation, a nonprofit I've established with my attorney's help that provides housing assistance to abandoned senior citizens. You can't be serious, Garrett sputtered. I'm entirely serious. The foundation has already been registered. The bequest is legally binding. I fixed each of them with the stare I'd once used to silence their childhood tantrums. You've made it abundantly clear that you value this property more than you value me, so neither of you will ever own it. Madison was openly crying now. Mom, that's not fair. We're your children. Are you? Because children visit their mother. Children call on her birthday. Children help when she's injured. I felt tears threatening, but held them back. I don't know who you two are, but you're not the children I raised. Garrett stood up, his face contorted with anger. You can't do this. We're your heirs. Being my biological children entitles you to exactly nothing. I said calmly. California law allows me to disinherit my children. If I choose, and I have chosen. We'll contest the will, Madison threatened. Her tears suddenly dry. You can try. I smiled slightly. But given the evidence I've collected of your intentions, the recordings, the social media posts, the fact that you abandoned me for 5 years until you discovered the property value, no court will side with you. I pulled out 2 small envelopes. However, I am leaving each of you something. They took the envelopes warily. Inside each was a single dollar bill and a USB drive. The dollar is your legal inheritance, which prevents you from claiming I forgot to include you. The drive contains a photo album of all the moments you missed in the last 5 years. My birthdays, Christmases. The day I got out of the hospital after my hip surgery, when my neighbors had to drive me home. Vanessa had backed away, her influence persona crumbling, as she realized she had live-streamed the entire confrontation to her followers. There's also footage of you, Garrett, promising to pay back the $20,000 I lent you for that Mercedes, and you, Madison, promising to visit me after your father's funeral, a promise you never kept. I stood up straight, channeling the authority I'd once had as head nurse on a busy ward. Courts tend to take a dim view of adult children who abandon their elderly parents only to reappear when there's money involved. This is emotional blackmail, Madison hissed. No, dear, this is consequences. I walked to the door and opened it. Now it's getting late and I'm tired. There's a very nice hotel about 10 minutes from here. I suggest you find rooms there. You're kicking us out. Madison looked stunned. Yes, this is my home, not yours. It never will be yours, and I choose who stays in it. Emma, my granddaughter, looked up at me with confused eyes. Grandma, are you mad at Daddy? My heart broke a little. This innocent child caught in her parents' greed. I knelt down to her level. Emma, I'm not mad. I'm sad. Families should take care of each other all the time, not just when they want something. Vanessa pulled Emma away. Don't talk to her like that. You'll confuse her. With truth. I straightened up, ignoring the twinge in my hip. Children understand more than you think. The next 30 minutes were a blur of shouting threats, and finally the slam of my front door as they left. Through the window, I watched them argue in the driveway before piling into their rental cars and speeding away. Only then did I allow myself to sink back into Philip's chair. and cry for the children I thought I had, for the family I'd lost long before. Tonight, Dorothy came over an hour later, bringing a bottle of wine and her steady presence. "You did it," she said, pouring us each a glass. I saw them leave. They looked furious. They were. I wiped away the last of my tears. But it's done now. "Are you really establishing that foundation?" Dorothy asked curiously. "Yes. Richard helped me set it up last week. I've already funded it with some of my savings." I looked around at the home that held so many memories. This house should help people who truly need it. "What will you do now?" Dorothy settled into the chair across from mine. I took a sip of wine and felt for the first time in years completely unburdened. "I'm going to sell the house myself and move to that senior community by Crystal Cove, the one with the walking paths along the ocean. I'll keep enough to live comfortably, and the rest goes to the foundation." "Richard will be pleased to hear that." Dorothy's eyes twinkled. "He talks about you, you know." I felt a blush creep up my cheeks. "Does he?" "Mm-hmm." "Asked if you might like to attend the community theater with him next weekend." I laughed a genuine laugh that felt foreign after so many years of loneliness. I might just say yes. A week later, I received separate emails from both Madison and Garrett. Madison threatened legal action, claiming I was mentally unstable and being manipulated by outsiders. Garrett took a different approach, suddenly apologetic, claiming he'd been stressed about work and that I'd misunderstood their intentions. I forwarded both emails to Richard, who responded with a brief but reassuring message. "Let them try. We have everything documented." True to their patterns, neither of them actually followed through. Madison's threat of legal action faded when her attorney, whom Richard knew professionally, likely explained the futility of her case. Garrett's attempts at reconciliation dissolved when he realized I truly wasn't going to change my mind about the house. What surprised me most was the email I received from Vanessa a month later. Apparently, her live stream of our confrontation had gone viral in the worst possible way. Her followers had turned against her, commenting on the cruelty of treating an elderly mother as nothing more than a source of inheritance. Several sponsorship deals had fallen through. She was writing to ask me to publicly forgive them to help repair her brand image. I didn't respond. Instead, I focused on my new life. The house sold quickly to a young couple with 2 small children who reminded me of Philip and myself 4 decades earlier. The husband was an engineer, like Philip had been. The wife, a pediatric nurse. They fell in love with the house immediately, speaking excitedly about raising their children with the beach as their backyard. When they asked about the previous owners, I simply said, "My husband and I bought it when we were starting out, just like you. We raised our family here. I hope you'll be as happy as we were." I didn't mention the pain of the past 5 years. I didn't tell them about the betrayal. Some stories aren't meant to be part of a house's history. 6 months later, I stood on the balcony of my new apartment watching the sunset over Crystal Cove State Beach. Behind me, the sounds of a small gathering filled the living room. Dorothy and her husband Richard, who had indeed taken me to the theater and many places since, and several new friends from my beachfront community. My old house had sold for $4-5 million. After taxes and fees, the foundation received over $3 million, enough to help dozens of elderly people who had been abandoned by their families. The first recipient had moved into her new home just last week. A 78-year-old former teacher whose children had sold her house after her husband died, promising to care for her, but instead placing her in a dingy care facility while they fought over the proceeds. The look on her face when we showed her the small but beautiful apartment we'd purchased for her use would stay with me forever. It's not charity. I'd told her when she protested she couldn't accept such generosity. It's justice. I hadn't heard from Madison or Garrett since that night, though I occasionally saw Vanessa's posts on social media through Dorothy's account. The live-streamed confrontation had damaged her influencer brand considerably. Last I heard, Garrett had been passed over for a promotion, and Madison had lost a major client who happened to be friends with Richard. I didn't take pleasure in their difficulties. They were still my children, despite everything. I had simply stopped allowing them to treat me as nothing more than an asset to be liquidated. Sometimes at night I'd look at old photos, Madison's graduation, Garrett's wedding, happier times, when I believed my children loved me for who I was, not what I owned. The pain was still there, but it had dulled from an acute stab to a gentle ache. "Elaine," Richard's voice called from inside. "We're about to cut the cake." I turned away from the sunset and smiled. Coming. Inside. My new friends had gathered around a cake decorated with a single candle. Not a birthday, a celebration of the Foundation's first housing grant to an 80-year-old woman whose son had sold her home out from under her. Speech Dorothy called as I entered. I looked around at these people who had become my chosen family and felt a surge of gratitude. 6 months ago, I thought I had lost everything that mattered. I thought family was only blood and that my worth was measured by what I could give to ungrateful children. I picked up my glass of champagne. I was wrong. Family is who shows up. Worth comes from how we help others, and it's never too late to start over. I raised my glass to new beginnings, to chosen family, and to remembering that the most valuable property isn't measured in dollars, but in love. As we toasted, my phone buzzed with a text. I checked it discreetly. Madison. "Mom, I've been doing a lot of thinking. I'm sorry. Can we talk?" I slipped the phone back into my pocket without responding. Perhaps someday we would talk. Perhaps someday I would forgive them both. But not today. Today was for celebrating my liberation, for honoring the woman who had finally recognized her own value, for embracing the future rather than clinging to a painful past. And as Richard caught my eye across the room, his smile warm and genuine, I realized something profound. Sometimes the most beautiful views aren't of oceans or sunsets, but of the road ahead stretching endlessly with possibilities. Later that evening, after my guests had left, Richard lingered behind, helping me clean up the dishes. His presence in my kitchen felt natural, comfortable. "Elaine," he said, drying a wine glass carefully, "I've been wanting to ask you something." "Yes." I turned to him, noting the slight nervousness in his usually confident demeanor. "The Foundation Board is planning a fundraising gala next month. I was wondering if you might accompany me." He set the glass down. "As my date." I smiled, remembering how long it had been since anyone had asked me on a proper date. "I'd like that very much, Richard." As he left that evening, he kissed me gently on the cheek. It wasn't a passionate embrace, but a promise of something new, blooming, something genuine and based on mutual respect. That night I sat on my balcony alone, listening to the waves. I thought about how life takes unexpected turns, how the betrayal that had broken my heart had also freed me, how losing my children had led me to find a new purpose, new friendships, perhaps even a new love. I thought of Philip, wondering if he would approve of the choices I'd made. Somehow I knew he would. He had always valued authenticity above all else. The next morning, I woke to a notification that the Foundation's website had received a large donation. Anonymous, but I had my suspicions. The amount was exactly $20,000, the sum Garrett had borrowed and never repaid. Perhaps it was the first step towards redemption. Perhaps it was just guilt. Money. Either way, it would help someone in need. I sent a brief text to Madison. "I'm not ready to talk yet, but I'm listening." It wasn't forgiveness, not quite yet. But it was an acknowledgement that some doors remain slightly ajar, even when they seem firmly closed. As I walked along the beach that morning, I felt lighter than I had in years. The ocean stretched before me, vast and full of possibilities, much like the life I was building for myself. A life where my value wasn't determined by what I owned or who I raised, but by the choices I made each day. A life that was at long last truly mine.